From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. We begin in Ohio tonight, where they hope upon hope they do not have another night like last night. In the hilly coal mining region of southeast Ohio, they have seen enough rampaging water to last a lifetime. At least 16 people have died in the floods in the last 24 hours. Many more are still missing, and the governor has declared a state of emergency. Everything happened so quickly. Here's ABC's Charles Thomas.
The worst damage occurred along Ouija and Pipe Creeks near the Ohio and West Virginia border. Half a foot of rain sent the streams on a deadly rampage. The water swept away cars and mobile homes and pushed entire houses off their foundations. Rob Skotka and his family barely had time to evacuate.
It happened in a matter of seconds. It just happened. You didn't have no warning, no nothing.
Rescuers used dogs to search the debris for bodies. Some were found several miles downstream in the Ohio River. The creeks here normally run about 4 feet deep. Last night, the water rose more than 20 feet in less than half an hour. 9-year-old Amber Colvin was in her house only 50 yards from Ouija Creek when the walls collapsed around her. The child, who can't swim, clung to floating debris for 7 hours until rescuers reached her this morning.
When I first came up with the water, I found a log, so I had to grab onto it or I'd drown.
Others are still missing, and the Ohio National Guard has joined the search. But officials fear the effort could be interrupted as more rain is forecast for the weekend. Charles Thomas, ABC News, Shadyside, Ohio.
Elsewhere in the Midwest, it was another bad night. Thousands of people took to the streets of Detroit to celebrate the Pistons winning the National Basketball Association championship. Some of it was ugly. Looting, cars overturned and burned. One car ran into a crowd. 4 people were killed. Another man died when he fell from a window while trying to light a Roman candle. 7 people died in all. In just a moment, Donald Trump doesn't make the deadline. And later in the broadcast, echoes of the past as the Romanian government continues to crack down on dissent. And our person of the week, the strong-arm tactics of the middle-aged. It was not a good day for the real estate developer Donald Trump. In fact, it hasn't been a good week. Some of his bills have come due, some of his big bills. And he doesn't have the money to pay them. Here's ABC's Alan Frank.
Donald Trump disappointed his many creditors today. He announced he could not make scheduled payments of more than $30 million on loans which financed the Trump Castle Casino, his least profitable property in Atlantic City. Trump also disclosed that his bankers have not given final approval to a $60 million refinancing loan he has been seeking for months. Trump still has a grace period to pay the castle debts, but if he fails to come up with the money, the casino could be auctioned to pay off the people who lent him more than $350 million to buy it. Trump could choose to protect himself in bankruptcy court.
If he does file in bankruptcy, that automatically stops foreclosure and keeps him in control of the casino and keeps him operating the casino.
Today's announcement came as something of a surprise. It had been widely thought the banks would lend Trump enough money to help him get through the summer season, when profits traditionally peak in Atlantic City. Trump did make one positive step today by paying another $16 million he owed on the Trump Plaza, his most profitable casino. Still, Trump owes more than $3 billion, plus interest, to banks and bondholders. And it now appears that he is in for the fight of his life to try to rescue his empire from his creditors. Alan Frank, ABC News, New York.
Sometimes failure can pay very well. A House task force overseeing the savings and loan bailout heard testimony today that some officials at failed S&Ls are being paid very well by the taxpayer. Here's ABC's Sheila Cast.
Western Empire Savings in California failed 4 months ago. The government took it over, but kept its 3 top executives on the payroll for several months. Altogether, 2/3 of the top executives of failed S&Ls are still on the job, at salaries averaging more than $250,000 a year. Government officials say there's not much they can do.
Some of these sweetheart management deals that they cut for themselves prior to the institution going into conservatorship are sometimes almost ironclad legally.
But the chairman of the task force said he could not even get the names and salaries of the executives.
Who are we protecting here? Who has the interest here? The American public that's going to have to pay $130 million? or the embarrassment of somebody having their $500,000 salary put in public.
Vento said failing to cut the salaries will just add to the cost of the bailout. Sheila Cast, ABC News on Capitol Hill.
There were some stronger than expected numbers on the overall economy today. A very moderate rise in inflation. Consumer prices in May went up 0.2%, and the trade deficit came down. It was $6.9 billion in April, down $1.5 billion from March. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrials gained about 7.5 points today, closing at 2935. The trading was heavy. The gain for the week overall, as you can see, more than 73 points. In the Midwest today, the entire University of Illinois basketball program is in big trouble. The National Collegiate Athletic Association has accused Illinois of buying players. Illinois is going to fight back. ABC's Armin Katayan has been investigating the case for and against.
The basketball team is a slam dunk success at the University of Illinois. 8 straight postseason tournaments, $2.5 million a year in TV and ticket revenue. Now the NCAA has charged the program with major recruiting violations. If found guilty, it will become the first basketball team to be sentenced to the NCAA's death penalty. Put out of business for a year or more. No practices, no games, nothing. The NCAA charges assistant coach Jimmy Collins offered $100,000 in cash, plus cars and clothing to high school stars Deon Thomas and LaFonso Ellis to come to his school. Collins denies it.
There could have been times when we sat down and said, well, your scholarship over a period of time is worth this amount of money. But as far as offering cash inducements, no, we haven't done that.
But the transcript of a telephone conversation appears to support the charge. Bruce Pearl, an assistant coach at Iowa, secretly recorded Thomas after the player chose Illinois over Iowa. The coach asked him about an alleged Illinois offer of money and a car. Pearl: Jimmy offered you $80,000 in the Blazer. That upset you, didn't it? Thomas: yeah, somewhat. Thomas now denies Illinois offered him anything. He says he responded the way he did because he felt pressured.
Basically, I was just telling him what he wanted to hear. The things basically that are in the allegations against Illinois were made by Iowa, and they were just twisted around.
In fact, Thomas's grandmother disputes an NCAA allegation and says Iowa, not Illinois, offered to pay for repairs to her house.
He said, we can fix it like new. He said, we can, and if you don't want to stay there, want to see Deon play, we can move it to Iowa.
The Iowa coach told ABC News that charge was, quote, a complete joke. Notre Dame star LaFonso Ellis has also informed the NCAA that Illinois offered him $20,000 in a car. University sources argue that Ellis's accounts have been inconsistent and vague. Illinois coach Lou Henson sees Ellis's testimony as part of a plot by Notre Dame coach Digger Phelps and others to eliminate Illinois from recruiting in talent-rich Chicago.
I don't like to use the word conspiracy, but you need to keep this in mind. They raid our state, and then when they don't get a player, Illinois must have done something.
In August, Illinois will argue its life-or-death situation before the NCAA. But for now, fans can only hope that a summer calm doesn't turn into a deadly silence. Armin Katayan, ABC News, Champaign, Illinois.
Other news: in the Gulf of Mexico today, officials released 100 pounds of microbes designed to quite literally eat patches of thick oil that have been spilling from the burning supertanker, the Mega Borg. 35 million gallons of oil are still on board the listing tanker, but they cannot be pumped into other ships until a fire in the engine room is completely out. When we come back, defending Romania's president with clubs and axes. Overseas today, Romania's president-elect Ion Iliescu has sent home thousands of coal miners he had summoned to Bucharest to crush political dissent. But not before they'd gone on a 2-day rampage against the president's opponents. It was the worst violence in Romania since last December's pro-democracy revolution. In Bucharest, ABC's John Donovan.
The miners pulled out of Bucharest, still carrying their clubs and axes, and autographed photos of the man they believe they rescued, Romania's president, Ion Iliescu. Earlier, Iliescu had gathered the miners together to thank them and to praise them for defending Romanian democracy. Praise many Westerners may find difficult to understand when most of the pictures from Romania this week have showed miners bashing heads, attacking citizens they suspect of being against Iliescu, a man to whom they feel indebted. Iliescu has been taking care of the coal miners. He has doubled their wages and shortened their hours. This week, it was easy for the miners to justify assaults on his political opponents, real and imagined. They have been told that some opposition parties, like the Peasants' Party and the Liberals, are against the working man. They ransacked the headquarters of both. No, they said, no one paid them to come to Bucharest this week. Shame on anyone who says that, they shouted. We will never sell out our country. It seems to bother them little that some of their acts this week may contradict the spirit of democracy they say they want for Romania. We cannot get to democracy in one leap, this miner says. His colleague adds that it is some of the opposition parties who are the threat to democracy. Before they left this evening, the miners made one last march through Bucharest's downtown. Once again, they assaulted Western journalists, including a film crew, recorded by a West German cameraman from his hotel room. Journalists are one more category of suspect persons to the coal miners, in a crusade that leaves them, as they head for home, feeling like heroes. John Donvan, ABC News, Bucharest.
In the Soviet Union today, Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Republic, suffered a setback when his candidate for prime minister of the republic was defeated by a more moderate reformer. The defeat was seen as a rejection of Mr. Yeltsin's plan to rapidly change the economy. As Barry Dunsmore reports from Moscow tonight, even Mr. Gorbachev's slower-paced economic reforms have now been put on hold.
In Moscow bread shops today, the good news for the consumer was that bread will stay at prices set in the 1920s. The bad news was that meant the government's first effort at creating a market economy had failed. In its final hours, the Soviet parliament rejected the reform program for making life more expensive for individuals without showing the benefits of the switch from a state to a market economy. The mayor of Leningrad was a leading opponent of the proposed reforms.
I voted against this government program because it took the country nowhere and discredited the whole idea of a market economy.
Even a senior editor of the government's own newspaper, Izvestia, concedes the problem.
Perestroika doesn't work yet at all. I would say that economically people is worse now than it was before Perestroika.
Some scenes from today illustrate the problems of the Soviet economy. There were the usual empty shelves, and there was the government shoe store where on this summer day they had a fine supply of winter boots. There were plenty of fruits and vegetables, but mainly in private markets at 10 times the state store price. The same was true with meat. 2 pounds of decent beef for 1 week's pay. For many Russians, this particular form of capitalism is very unattractive. But there are economists here who insist that with radical reform, things will get better.
I do believe that the beginning of the next century will be called later a Soviet economic wonder.
Now the Soviets have given themselves until September to come up with yet another reform program. If it works, that will be something of a Soviet economic wonder. Barry Dunsmore, ABC News, Moscow.
Still international news, the president of Nicaragua says she will cut her country's army by more than a half. Violeta Chamorro said that before she finishes her first 100 days in office, that's on the 2nd of August, the army will be reduced to 41,000. Under the Sandinista government, there were more than 100,000 men and women in the armed forces. In our next segment, the lobbyists opposed to abortion, looking for a political victory after a long dry spell. In Louisiana last night, their State House of Representatives passed a bill which would outlaw all abortions except when it is required to save a mother's life. Governor Buddy Roemer threatened to veto it unless rape and incest were also added. Even then, it would be one of the toughest abortion laws in the U.S., one of the first victories in some time for the nation's largest anti-abortion lobby, which is meeting this week in California. Here's ABC's Gary Shepard.
The vote in Louisiana was welcome news at the annual convention of the Right to Life Committee.
I'm really excited that Louisiana has taken a stand to protect unborn children.
Very happy. I think this is really progress, and it's a shot in the arm for the United States to get back on track.
A shot in the arm for a movement that has lost ground recently and faces dozens of congressional races this November, as well as thousands of state contests where abortion is expected to be the main issue.
This is the remaining unanswered human rights question of our day.
Our problem is
that the media has portrayed us as sort of losing this past year, and has portrayed the pro-abortion side as on a roll. Not so.
At political strategy seminars, a battle plan was unveiled. Don't try to ban all abortions without exception, but focus the debate on specific reasons.
If candidates can say, look, I can't support sex selection abortions, I can't support abortion simply as a means of birth control, I think that parents do have to be involved in the abortion issue. That is a winning strategy.
The latest public opinion polls say that while most Americans believe women should have the right to decide on an abortion, they also believe there should be some limitations on that right. With both sides turning up the heat, the coming election campaign may well turn out to be an unofficial national referendum on the abortion question. Gary Shepard, ABC News, Sacramento.
There has been a major attempt this week to get at two of the nation's most notorious street gangs. Hundreds of federal agents in 11 states have launched a coordinated attack on the Crips and the Bloods. Over the past 2 days, more than 160 members of the gangs, which were spawned in Los Angeles, have been arrested. They're said to be deeply involved in much of the nation's cocaine traffic. President Bush has vetoed a bill that would have made it easier for federal workers to take part in partisan politics. The president said the measure to amend the Hatch Act, which bars such activity, could lead to political exploitation and abuse. And a presidential aide confirms that Mr. Bush will also veto the Family Leave Bill, which was passed by Congress. It would give both men and women time off to care for their families in case of need. We'll be back in just a moment.
World News Tonight with Peter Jennings and the Person of the Week are brought to you by Citibank.
Our person this week was a fairly easy choice, especially for those of us over 40. It is not that he had such a profound impact on world events this week, but when he did what he did on Tuesday night, you really had to marvel at the wonder of it.
I don't go out with the intent to pitch a no-hitter. I go out with the intent to give our ball club the opportunity to win the ball game and pitch the best game I possibly can.
A 2-0 pitch.
Baseball's record book is cluttered with the name Nolan Ryan.
Number 6 for Nolan Ryan. The Express has done it once again.
Monday night against the powerful Oakland A's, Ryan pitched his 6th career no-hit game, breaking the record set by Nolan Ryan. Last August, Oakland's Ricky Henderson helped Ryan to set another incredible record, strikeout victim, 5,000. To date, Ryan has 5,152 strikeouts, more than anyone else, and 294 wins in a career of 25 years. Nolan Ryan is 43 years old.
Nolan Ryan at 43 years old is still a phenom. Historically, I'd put him among the top 10 pitchers of all time.
I feel like the key to my longevity has been I was blessed with good genetics.
So give some credit to Lynn and Martha Ryan, who raised Nolan in tiny Alvin, Texas. Nolan began striking out opposing batters by the time he was 8. By his senior year of high school, Nolan was already a phenom, striking out 19 batters in one 7-inning game and winning 22 games. Ryan was drafted by the New York Mets in 1965. In 1967, he married his high school sweetheart, Ruth. He has never made a baseball deal without the family coming first. They all still live in Alvin, Texas.
Payoff pitch. Striking out with a fastball.
The Nolan Ryan fastball has become legend.
Nolan Ryan throws the ball faster than any pitcher in history. I think Reggie Jackson had the definitive quote about him. He said, trying to hit the Nolan Ryan fastball is like trying to eat coffee with a fork.
On August the 20th, 1974, scientists from Rockwell International measured the Ryan fastball with a specially designed wind tunnel. 101 miles per hour that day, still the fastest pitch ever recorded. Here, we'll put you in the batter's box for a second.
I still am basically a power pitcher. The biggest change is my velocity probably is off 4 to 5 miles an hour from probably at my peak 15, 18 years ago.
15 to 18 years ago. Not much consolation for players of the 90s, half his age.
It's in a whole nother range. It's really hard to even explain. It just explodes and it's on you so quick that all you can do is react.
The Nolan Ryan work ethic is as famous as his fastball. He has managed for these 25 years to maintain his intensity and his good humor.
I still enjoy competing. I enjoy being in shape. It's a challenge to be able to compete on this level with the younger players and still be successful. And a lot of the younger players, when they're giving me a bad time, I'm called everything from Grandpa to wisecracks made about how it was to pitch against Babe Ruth and a tie cop.
They should send Nolan Ryan to the Hall of Fame and send his arm to the Smithsonian because it's a remarkable instrument.
The arm and the attitude. The Ryan Express.
Strike two. My attitude is I take each year as it comes along. I think when you're younger, you're caught up in the excitement and the youth of it and just being glad to be there and being a part of it. And I think the older you get, the more appreciation you have.
And so we choose Nolan Ryan. We tried to get him a smile. The older he gets, the more appreciation we have for one of the national pastime's national treasures, still a boy of summer in his 40s. That's our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. Have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday. Good night.